All right, so we are recording. I'm so happy we're finally doing this because, like you said, you have on-call people going into labor and have to run here and there. And then with the construction of my place, it's been uh, busy. But yeah, I'm happy we're finally doing this. I'm super excited to talk to you because it's so relevant to the project that I'm doing, which is all about preparenting, preparing to become a mom. I'm not a mom yet. But I'm diving deep into like the preparing phase and everything that comes beforehand, because the mothers in my life when I was growing up kind of just went ahead with it and kind of winged it, and there wasn't much like internal work or preparation. So yeah, I'm very dedicated to that. And this is Karine for everyone who is watching. You're a medical legal assistant, yoga instructor, paddleboard instructor, doing all sorts of interesting stuff. You do photography as well, and you became a doula. So tell me about that, how you decided to go into this field.
So I never thought that I would become a doula. When I became pregnant with my son back in 2019, I got so absorbed by everything about birth during my pregnancy. I would start to read books and articles, and then I started watching birth videos on YouTube. I started buying birth videos that I could find, and then I started getting involved into podcasts. So listening to podcasts like The Birth Hour, Birthful, Evidence-Based Birth, and that kind of stuff. And then I turned into a huge birth geek. And then I knew that I wanted to have an unmedicated birth at that point, or that I would attempt to have an unmedicated birth. And for myself to prepare for my birth, I ended up, having my team built up. So I had my mother, who's a nurse, my sister, who has 3 kids, and my husband. And I felt really empowered during my birth. I felt super well supported. And so basically when I gave birth to my son, I looked back at my experience and I was like, I could not have done that without the people who were supporting me, which is kind of what triggered maybe being a doula would be something really helpful and fulfilling. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened. And then 3 months postpartum, this might be TMI, but my grandmother passed away, and she sent me a chunk of money as an inheritance. And I was like, oh, this is a sign, like maybe I should sign up for my doula training. And so that's what I did. I was on mat leave and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna take this money and I'm gonna push forward. So I went to my doula training, and I had my little newborn with me at my training, and I was feeding and pumping and like all this stuff during the training. And when I finished the training, I just immediately knew, like, okay, this is what I have to be doing.
That's a really incredible story. Like everything kind of just aligned.
Yeah.
What do you offer as a service as a doula for people who don't really know? Like a lot of people think midwife and doula is the same thing. So maybe explain the difference between the two, and then what you offer as a service.
So midwives are medical providers. They're trained to provide medical, procedures and all that kind of stuff, and evaluate the patient. Doulas do not do anything medical. So we're more about the emotional support, physical support, and providing education and resources for birthing parents and birthing families to feel fully supported and informed walking into birth and postpartum. So my role as a doula, like I just said, is to provide those things: emotional support, physical support, and information. So I love when my clients get really curious and they'll ask me questions about, let's say, delayed cord clamping, and then I could just send them like all the evidence resources that I have and podcasts and information, so they can make an unbiased decision with what research actually shows, which is not something that care providers typically do, right? They just kind of say it's not really necessary, or they're just pushing, they have their biases. So I like giving all of the information so people can make their own decisions. Yeah. And then, so as a birth doula, typically what we do is we follow people as they go through their pregnancy. We help support them with any of their questions and that kind of stuff. And then we help prepare them for the birth, and then help prepare them and give them resources for postpartum as to how they could best thrive during those times. And then as a postpartum doula, we offer services. Sometimes it could be things like light house cleaning, like cooking, caring for baby. I particularly just do overnight care. So basically I would just allow parents to sleep all night. Mom might have to wake up to pump a few times, but I would give the breast milk or formula. And so, yeah, they'll get like a full 12 hours of uninterrupted time away from baby while the baby is safe with somebody who has experience.
That's great. I
Yeah.
I find that so important and so interesting because a lot of like my blog and the stories that I talk about is like the reparenting phase. So like I had a traumatic childhood and I don't have the most um, I guess usual relationship to like my mother and the women in my family. I'm very
Mhm.
disconnected from everyone and very independent and on my own. So a lot of my friends that will say things like, you know, how helpful their mom was, or like other women around them that have had kids. I don't necessarily have that support system, or that I will not be turning to these people for that kind of support. So doulas are so important and interesting for people like me and some of my readers that also want to become a parent but are scared to not have necessarily that support system,
Yeah.
because you also have not just your own experience but your education as well.
Yeah.
So I was listening to want to segue into a TED talk. I forget who it was, but this man was explaining how in palliative care patients and seniors that are close to dying, they would ask them where they would want to spend their last day. And most
Mhm.
of them, almost all of them, said not in a hospital bed. And so it brought up this question of, are hospitals meant to give birth and to like basically spend your last day and die? Is it meant to start life and end life, or is it really just to treat acute illness?
Mhm.
And then with the medical procedures and all that, and the process, and the, like you said, kind of like the providers and what they know, and the what they always do and how it usually goes and what they usually recommend, it's not as personal to the mother and to her process and to the baby's process. I feel like it's more oriented towards, you know, what they do every day when they give all of these moms assistance to birth. Like, this is what we do. Whereas doula or midwife work is more personal to the mom and what she needs. So I'm curious about your opinion about that, about kind of the home birth or birth center and then hospital, what you've experienced as someone who assists in those situations.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do with my clients when they call me, pretty early on during their pregnancy, I do have some clients that call me when they pee on the stick and right away it comes positive and they're like, I need a doula.
Yeah.
And then I have other clients who call me when they're 36 weeks pregnant and they're like, well, I just found out I need a doula. But when I do get those ones that call me earlier in their pregnancy, one thing that I do tell them that's really important is to find the right care provider for them. And a lot of the time, they don't even know that they have the options that they have, whether it be with an OB, with a family doctor who specializes in childbirth, or with a midwife, whether they can birth in the hospital with an OB or with a midwife, or a birth center with a midwife, or at home. So that is a really good question. For sure, when you're walking into a hospital setting, there's going to be a more medicalized, biased approach, right? As much as, some providers tend to say that they like a more natural, holistic approach or whatnot, they're still bound by the procedures and the standards of the hospital in the setting that they're in. And so, for some things, it's like, oh, well, if this happens, this ensues, like it must, because that is the standard of care according to our hospital. Meanwhile, midwives also have a standard of care to respect when they're in a birth center setting. If, let's say, mom's waters break and then there's meconium in the water. So meconium is a baby poop. Typically, they would have to transfer the mother to the hospital at that point. Versus if you're at home with the midwife has her own discretion to choose whether it's an appropriate time to stay at home or transfer to the hospital, that kind of thing. So it really depends on like what setting you're in. When it comes to choosing your care provider, I think it's a question of looking at your global health. So like more of a holistic approach, right? So if you're having a healthy pregnancy, you're a healthy person, having no complications, there's no need to be in the hospital, unless being in the hospital is what provides you with more safety emotionally and psychologically. If being in a hospital setting is what makes you feel comfortable and safe, then go ahead, go into the hospital, right? But if you feel like hospitals are like a sterile environment and you get white coat syndrome and that kind of thing, then maybe that might not be the ideal environment for you. Maybe you'd want to explore a birth center. And then maybe once you start to get involved with your midwife, you develop the confidence to be like, oh, maybe I am interested to birth at home. You get all the same things, except you don't have to be bound by, the structure or the standard care of the birth center and that kind of stuff. So yeah, for sure, I think midwives provide a more holistic approach to, you know, pregnancy and preparing for childbirth. You know, you could just look at when you go in for your prenatal visits, your OB or your family doctor usually gives you maybe max 10 minutes. That's being generous per visit. And it's kind of more focused on like, oh, okay, baby's measuring well, the heartbeat's good, you look good. All right, cool, let's go. Bye. We'll see you next time. See you in 4 weeks. Versus a midwife will actually sit down and she'll have like a whole hour blocked off. So you can literally pick her brain, you could chat about whatever you want. They ask you how the baby's doing, how you're doing, they check your measurements, check all the normal things that an OB would usually do, but they go in depth into what maybe you might be needing. So if you're having questions or concerns about postpartum or pregnancy or birth, you can bring all those questions up without feeling rushed. So yeah, that's one thing to consider when choosing your care provider. And it's hard because, you know, we've been kind of like bombarded as a culture into thinking that, you know, a normal birth has to happen in a hospital and that birth is dangerous. And, you know, if you're not birthing in the hospital without a care provider, you're at risk of being, you know, injured or whatnot. But birth is a normal process, right? We've been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. So yeah, it's just to, I think, reframe the mindset when you're personally walking through pregnancy.
Definitely overwhelming, all the information and all like you know, the what ifs and how to choose. A lot of the women I speak with will say that, you know, a home birth or a midwife assisted birth is really like it piques their curiosity. It feels really like comforting and like something they would want. But then it's the what if something goes wrong? You're not at a hospital. You're not, you know, it's the big what ifs. But for the mothers that I know who have given birth at home or with midwives, I mean, knock on wood, I mean, I know it's not the experience for everyone, but they haven't had, you know, crazy complications where the fact they gave birth at home was the main issue that, you know, hindered the baby's health or anything like that. So,
they're still, and midwives are still bound by, you know, rules and regulations, right? So if there's something that's coming up during the birth that's alarming, the midwife is fully trained and knowledgeable to know like, okay, this is time to pack up and go to the hospital. And whether it be a non-urgent transfer where you get to go to the hospital by your car or an urgent transfer where you get transferred by an ambulance, they know, right? They're trained for this. They're specialists. Like this is what they do kind of like an OB. This is what they do. The only difference between the OB and the midwife is that OBs are trained to be able to assist with procedures like surgeries and C-sections and that kind of stuff, and midwives don't. That's the only difference.
Yeah, I feel like people sometimes still think that midwives, it's like the 1900s, early 1900s, where like they're literally just a woman in the village that has a lot of kids. And
mixing potions and
really, it's like they're educated and trained like doctors. You know, it's
exactly, yeah.
It's important for people to know how much training they actually have. What have you seen in your experience where the hospital will lack guidance or advice for new moms that is, you know, a significant thing that they should know? Like, for example, mothers that I've spoken to talk a lot about the breastfeeding process, where in the hospital they're not really assisted with teaching the baby how to latch and really like how it's going to go. It's kind of just like you'll figure it out. Your body is meant to do that, but it's actually much more of a struggle than what it's made to, you know, how it's talked about or how they're just expected to figure it out. And it takes such a toll on a mom that wants to breastfeed and that isn't necessarily getting the hang of it, or the baby's not latching properly. So I've in my experience talking to mothers, I've noticed that there seems to be a lack on the hospital end for helping mothers with breastfeeding. Anything else or anything that you can expand on that?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Breastfeeding is a huge issue when it comes to postpartum care, immediate postpartum care. You know, although the nurses do get some basic training, they're not in-depth training, and the physicians sure as hell don't have in-depth training for breastfeeding. And even if there is a lactation consultant that's available to come visit in the room, moms are usually, or birthing persons are usually like in such a haze from that first like 24 hours of postpartum that sometimes the information goes like this and then goes like this.
Yeah.
And even if they were paying attention and they are grasping, the information isn't in depth enough to actually, evaluate fully what's going on. And it happens often where, if mom is experiencing a little bit of pinching on the breast when the baby latches, they'll just be like, oh, come, it's okay, you'll get used to it, come, it'll get better. But sometimes there's a tongue tie that went undiagnosed and the OB checked and they're like, no, there's no tongue tie. And then, weeks later, when the mom is finally actually struggling with blisters on her breasts, she goes to see a lactation consultant, and the lactation consultant, the one who's actually specialized in breastfeeding, is the one who's able to see like, oh, maybe there's a cheek tie and a tongue tie and a lip tie. And so that's, there's for sure not enough in-depth information and education with regards to breastfeeding. But that being said, when people are in the hospital for, less than 48 hours, typically, it's kind of hard to go in depth, and it's kind of hard also to have enough time to even know if there's an issue with breastfeeding. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. At the beginning, you're kind of just like clumsy and you don't really know what's going on. You're in a haze postpartum. So it's like it's not just the issue of the hospital or the issue of the nurses or the issue of the midwives not providing the care. It's just the situation, right? I think that the best thing to do is when you're pregnant to align yourself and find resources in your community, like a lactation consultant or a naturopath or an osteopath or a chiro, and have all these resources lined up so that when something does arrive, once you get home, you can be like, okay, I'm experiencing this. I need to call my lactation consultant that I have already booked and, come set up information for when I was pregnant. And so that's also something that I offer to my clients. I make a list of some resources in Ottawa in their area, and they get to, have access to that list if ever they're experiencing something, weird or strange or difficulties. They know who to call, and they're not, stuck being on Google being like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, for sure. It's super helpful to have that list beforehand and kind of know where to go. Because I can only imagine when it's not something that's brought up and you think you're just going to figure it out and you're not figuring it out, the stress makes it even worse to try to then find someone. And how early can you book resources or book a midwife or a doula? How early can you actually look into those things before you actually give birth?
So you can book a midwife as soon as you're pregnant, basically, as soon as you pee on the stick. You can also book a midwife as soon as you pee on the stick, basically. So you can call in, and often midwives have a wait list, or they have their schedule that's not yet made, so they call it a wait list. And so you can just call in and say I'd like to place my name for a midwife, and then when they have one available or their schedule is actually made up, they'll call you back and they'll say okay, we have availability with this midwife, we can assign you to her if you're interested or still looking. It does happen where clients that are later in their pregnancy, later, the latest I've seen was somebody switch from an OB at 37 weeks to a midwife. So those are rare because often the midwives are already fully booked up. But it was a special situation with a breech baby, and the midwife who specializes in breech births in Ottawa was like, I will 100% support you for your birth. There's situations where you can switch later on during your pregnancy and have success finding a midwife or another provider that might be better of a match for you and your family. There's no limit of time, basically. It's just a question of if there's going to be availability to take you on or not. And even if, let's say, you have an OB already and you kind of want to fire your OB or switch to a different provider that you feel more comfortable with, even if it's to another OB, you are allowed, it is within your rights to switch to another care provider. Your regular OB is not allowed to say no, you're too late in your pregnancy, you can't switch.
My background is journalism, and there's this really interesting journalism article that came out that I remember reading over and over again. I was blown away, but they were explaining how there's only a few schools in Canada that offer the midwife program, and only a few numbers actually graduate. And the demand is going up so fast that they can't fulfill the demand. And it's definitely, I think, more and more the conversations I have now are geared towards holistic births and home births, and doulas and midwives offering support rather than the normal, doctor, nurse, and OB and things that our parents probably got. And like, do you see that in the doula field as well, where the demand is so big, the curiosity is so great, and then the service is kind of like lacking resources because there's not enough doulas for the amount of mothers that want the service?
Yeah. So I think a huge impact that we had recently was because of COVID. People got so scared of birthing in hospitals, either because they were scared of getting COVID if they birthed in the hospital, or they were scared about restrictions changing and not being able to have their support persons there with them, right?
Sure.
Or even, some people were really concerned about having to push with a mask on, which is still a rule in some hospitals, So some people are really terrified about those things. And so they are looking into alternatives such as midwifery care. And then when you have a midwife, then midwives often say like, oh, have you considered having a doula? So they're kind of like our little plugins.
Yeah.
And then that's when people start to get educated on what a doula is. And so if they're going for a birth center birth or a home birth, especially, people tend to want to have that extra support, that resource with them. So there definitely is a heightened demand, at least during COVID, that I've seen. Although I've only been a doula for 3 years, but I have been talking with other doula colleagues, and they all agree that there's like a huge influx on the demand. And even with regards to like right now, I'm also pregnant, like very pregnant, and I was supposed to, I was supposed to stop taking clients as of the end of May. And then, oopsie, June came around. I kept having, clients calling in. I really need a doula. I really need a doula. I ended up doing 3 births in June. And then I was like, okay, for June, I'm done. And then I ended up booking 4 births for July. So right now I have a client in labor as we speak. Yeah. And then I have another one due in the next 2 weeks. So it's one of those things that it's like, there's just so much demand that I can't even say no at this point. I'm just like, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, you seem very passionate about it. And like you said, like you developed like your passion for it going through the birth yourself. So I'm sure that you have like a special place in your heart for moms where it's like, oh, maybe I can do one more and one more. But then when are you due?
I'm due first week of September.
Okay. Wow. Coming fast. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So as a mom, what is something that you recently did that you're super proud of, or like a win that you had in your role as a mother? And what did you do?
So my husband has been away for 2 months. He's gone for a total of 3 months. He's in training for the police. And so I think that's like a huge win for me, to be going through pregnancy without my partner and parenting a 2-year-old without my partner and moving into a new house without my partner. Just everything has been super overwhelming, on top of like my 10,000 jobs, right? Like working my regular day shift job, and then in the evening teaching paddleboard yoga, and then in the night doing overnights postpartum care, and then being on call for births, and like navigating and managing all of that, like being a boss mom. And also just making sure that I make time for my child and I'm there for my child. So luckily I have an awesome mother-in-law who's readily available to help me out when it's needed. But yeah, that's something I'm extremely proud of. And my house is always clean still, which is a good job.
Yeah, for real. Wow.
So I don't know. I think it's good. I thought I was going to be a lot more depleted without having my partner here, but let's be honest, there's way less laundry to do now that he's not.
Right. That's true. Less laundry, less dishes.
Yeah. So I think it's good just to know that like I can do it by myself, and I've been managing by myself, and I have, people like family members available to step in. It's good. Yeah.
And I'm sure like reaching out for help for a doula also kind of encourages you to reach out for help when you need it as well. Yeah, which I find that a lot of moms I talk to say they don't ask for help when they actually need help. They don't ask for help enough. So
that was a huge lesson that I learned in my first postpartum experience. I was one of those people that was focused on being a super mom and doing everything. And, as a 4 weeks postpartum, I was going to, prenatal yoga classes with my child. I brought my child to swimming when he was like 2 months old. We were going to lullaby classes. I was just doing all the things. I was like, okay, come, I'm going to make sure that my child has like everything, and like we're doing everything together. And I'm going to cook, and I'm going to clean, and I'm going to do all these things. And 4 months postpartum, I just crashed and burned and went into like a really bad postpartum depression. And I did not know I was in it. I knew something was wrong, but I did not know I was in it until the day that I was cooking toast. And then all that could go through my mind while I was cooking the toast was, I wonder what would happen and how much it would hurt if I would just shove this knife in the toaster while it's on. And I was like, maybe something's not too right in my head right now.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, that's when I kind of realized too much is too much. I didn't have enough trust that people knew how to take care of my child the way I wanted him to be taken care of. I was super fearful that people would like hurt my child. I was so anxious, just want to do everything myself. And now being a doula, I'm like, dear God, I'm so happy that I know now what I know and how to support families so that they're not feeling that way, because nobody should feel that way.
And now you're managing all these things on your own, which is like a great like evolution, right? Of like of your person and of your development and stuff. Like now, I mean, it's great to have your partner there, obviously, but like you're doing freaking well.
There's a difference between doing it now when he's 2 years old versus in fresh postpartum phase where you're like hormonally imbalanced and dealing with all sleep deprivation and all this stuff, right? So I think that we need to, as a culture, just say it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to not be able to do everything, and you don't need to be a super mom. So
and like you mentioned sleep deprivation. I worked at the children's hospital for a long time, and like with new mothers, like sleep deprivation, I don't think people actually realize how absolutely detrimental it can be to your general well-being.
Well, it's a torture mechanism, right? like
literally. And then you mentioned doing overnight care. Have you experienced the sleep deprivation in the first phase that kind of made you passionate about offering that as a service?
No, the only reason I do overnight care is because I still need to have some hours of sleeping before working my day job.
So it works with yours.
Yeah. So my child personally didn't sleep through the night until he was 19 months old.
Okay.
He was still waking up 2 to 3 times a night to breastfeed. That was a decision that I decided to make. I did not want to sleep train. I was letting my child, do baby-led sleep, following his cues, not pushing anything onto him. And then miraculously one day when he started daycare, he just never woke up, and then it just stuck, and then he just slept through the night. I like to think that my child felt like he was in such a safe environment, in such a safe space, that he could just fall asleep without me having to even try. It just happened. For sure, I think that offering that service to clients is like a good thing, because I was like super sleep deprived as a mom, seeing as I was breastfeeding that much for that long overnight. But yeah, no, there's no particular reason like that I especially just do nights. It's really just for my convenience.
Convenience. Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
And so as a doula, something that you want all moms to be reminded of, like if there's one thing you could just tell moms right now from your experience as a doula.
Your intuition is not wrong. So I think that, unless you're experiencing, postpartum depression or like postpartum psychosis or something, unbalanced, where your intuition might be leading you to believe, lies or something that's false. In other circumstances, I think that your intuition as a mom is generally right. And you don't need to be listening to, everybody's opinion or stories or advice. It's not because, your great aunt or your mom or your friend or your sister had this experience with their child, or their friend who experienced this and did this. It's not because they had a good success story with doing those things that it's going to be good for your family.
Yeah.
So I think that it's always important to just come back and listen to, what feels right for you and your family. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that smart little gut feeling that we tend to ignore.
Yeah, it kind of ties in with, the name of my business, Innate. So
Yeah.
like it's from within, like it's something that you're kind of like born with. You're born with the ability to be birthed.
Mhm.
You have your intuition, you have the ability to be a mother or to be a care provider. If you don't identify as mother. Yeah, your intuition is super important.
Yeah, it's a good reminder too, like that it's at the end of the day, like you're capable, like you just are. It's in your human nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it kind of removes a bit of the fear and the fog of like maybe I'm not going to be able, but we technically all innately are.
Yeah.
As a mom, when in doubt, is there a book, a podcast, or something that was a huge resource for you that you would recommend?
Oh my God, girl.
Probably all of them. Yeah.
Do you have like show notes or something that we can like put the
Yeah.
list of resources
Credits
on?
at the end. Yeah.
A lot. But I'll name a few for now, but then like, I can totally give you like a whole list of things if you want to post them. If somebody prefers listening to podcasts, the Birth Hour and Birthful podcast. So those are usually birth stories and also just like really fast little podcasts on pertinent information, such as like, let's say delayed cord clamping or inducing or types of things like that. If you like watching birth videos, then there's the birth video, These Are My Hours. That's really good. That's a paid movie to watch. It's a home birth. But just the fact that she's uninterrupted during the labor process is what's really beautiful to see, because you can see that birth is a natural, normal thing. There's also a book and a website called Evidence-Based Birth, and that's where you can find a bunch of unbiased research, evidence-based information with regards to pretty much anything that could show up during pregnancy and birth. I think those are good ones for now.
I will look them up and I'll tag them in our little post there. And then finally, as a doula, advice for people who are in my process right now, so the preparenting phase, what I like to call it. So not pregnant, not trying, just before doing personal work and personal growth and personal development and healing and reparenting myself before I step into the next phase, which is my childbearing phase, and then my mother phase if I can childbear. But yeah, any advice for the preparenting people?
Yeah, start educating yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just get curious. Don't just take for granted, that you're going to get pregnant, you should go to the hospital, you should find an OB, and you should do all these things that movies have been telling us to do and your grandma's telling you to do and whatnot. Come educate yourself and find out what's out there, what are the options. And then there's also a thing about finding your health as well, making sure that you're in a healthy space. Maybe taking up walking or yoga or meditation. Find a therapist if you need to, discuss anything or go over anything that you think might arise during pregnancy, birth, or postpartum, and try to settle those things in, before, if you can.
That's brilliant. That's all super important and right up the alley of the work that I've been doing and promoting. So that's very nice to hear. Mm-hmm. Points everyone in the right direction. If anyone is interested in your service, I mean, now you're going to be going out off of availability for a while, but how can they reach you or find you?
You can find me at Innate Doula or Innate Birth and Postpartum Doula on Facebook. I can also link my website, and I'll be back doing births as of February.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. So much information, so much important information. I hope that everyone listening finds something that helps them, informs them, takes weight off their shoulders. It definitely did for me. A lot of new things I'm going to go search and read and Google and look into, and all those good resources you gave also. Thank you very much. Before you get a phone call that you have to run, your client is giving birth, I'll let you go. Thank you. And if ever you want to just come on here again with new experiences, new stories, you're always welcome.
Thank you, Bree. I really appreciate it. And thanks for what you're doing in your work.
Oh, you're very welcome. Have a good one.
Bye. Bye.